When you think of modern day medicine, it's quite impressive what achievements come to mind. Think of things like replacing hearts, successfully using laser surgery to cure millions of eye-related problems, treat illnesses that meant certain death just a few decades ago. On the other hand, if you think of historic medicine, first thing that comes to mind could be things like inserting leeches into your bloodstream, having birds pick out your wounds, a common flu leading to guaranteed death. But Anya, I hear you say, surely medicine in our history wasn't like that at all, right? And to that I say, ah yes, ancient Mesopotamia. Many empires, cultures, forms of art and religions found their start here. It would only be natural to expect that their medical knowledge didn't lag behind either. And well, let's just say that medicine was very religion-based. What do I mean by that? Well, firstly, doctors were seen as the medium through which the gods healed the people. In the same way you could only be healed by God, it were also these exact unearthly beings that put the illness upon you in the first place. Mainly because the sick person had sinned or committed any number of crimes against them. For the people of ancient Mesopotamia, that however was not just an excuse but a firm belief, as they would also not blame the doctor if they couldn't heal a patient. Instead, it would simply be viewed as, the gods didn't want them to survive. In order to become a doctor though, you often had to go through year and sometimes decade-long education, at the end of which you could decide to be one of those two healers, an Asu or an Asipu, which is probably mispronounced. The difference is probably best explained with an example. For instance, let's imagine a woman who just went into labor and is about to give birth. The Asu would in this case give perhaps some medical drinks or soups to the mother in order to ease her pain and help with birthing the child. The Asipu would do something like this. Now, while to you there might be an obvious difference in the effectiveness of those two methods, in the eyes of the ancient people, those two doctors were equally skilled and would heal just as successfully. Of course it helped that if the patient ended up dying, either doctor could just go ahead and say, God willed it so, and move on to the next target, patient. As you probably guessed, methods used to heal people were rather limited to either herbal treatment, sometimes also including things like alcohol, honey and milk, or religious treatment, which primarily focused on sending thoughts and prayers. I forgot I wrote that. The last thing worth mentioning though may be that the payment isn't based on the deed the doctor does, but rather on how much a patient could pay. Meaning, the rich would pay in silver and gold, sometimes loads of it, while the poor might just give a hot soup or a cup of clay for the same treatment. Of course you'd think that obviously the doctors would prefer to treat the rich people, but from various cuneiform texts, we can guess that any patient was viewed with the same priority regardless of wealth. Ancient Egypt offered doctors a similar high standing as they too were, just like in Mesopotamia, considered the very elite of the country. Sometimes this high standing would even transcend the human realm entirely. For example, this fella called Imhotep. As the personal Healy boy of his pharaoh, he gained so much fame and power that the Egyptians eventually deified him and made him the god of medicine and healing, promptly replacing the previous god of this task. Unlike in Mesopotamia though, Egyptian doctors didn't specialize on a certain type of healing, but rather on a certain kind of illness. On one hand, this specialization would mean that the doctors would eventually become masters of their field and knew how to treat a certain kind of illness better than anyone else. But on the other hand, things like this might happen. Yeah, so about your doctor, the one that's good at treating your illness is currently out of town, but Jeff here is fantastic at amputating a leg if you want to try that out. Only because a doctor trained for years to be able to cure one specific illness as good as possible, doesn't mean it was actually him that cured the patient though. No, it was actually the gods again. The Egyptians may have been more eager to learn about the suffering of their sick than the Mesopotamians, but that doesn't mean they didn't blame the gods for it. Similarly, if a doctor managed to heal someone, it was only because the gods lent him a hand in doing so, and thus allowed him to access divine healing powers. How can we know all that? Well, simply put, our beloved pyramid-building desert fellas were absolutely obsessed with writing. They wrote down nigh on everything they could get their hands on, and thanks to the dry desert climate, a big chunk of these papyri actually survived the millennia. It's also through such texts that we know that the ancient Egyptian physicians already used things like scissors or scalpels for surgery. Like this one for example, that says... something, probably. Anyways, the existence of mummies itself is a very clear indicator of how skilled ancient medicine practitioners were, as they needed to carefully remove specific organs in order to prevent the decay of the body. As before though, the best medicine for the living consisted primarily of herbs and other substances like aloe vera, garlic, basil, honey, parsley, or sandalwood. These herbs and spices were not only given to people feeling sick, but also people undergoing surgery, which, by the way, seemed to be rather successful for the most part, at least if you want to believe ancient historian Herodotus. While on the topic of surgery, The Egyptians had a rather precise understanding of the human body already, as they viewed veins and arteries as the rivers of the body which transport blood, and also knew that certain organs should never be harmed when performing any kind of surgery, as they were understood to be vital. And by the way, for the most part, when I'm talking about surgery in this video, I'm talking about the amputation of a body part or removal of foreign objects like arrowheads. Complicated surgeries, like pretty much anything that has to do with organs, was probably never a thing that happened. Or at least my research didn't indicate any of that ever being the case. Not on a living, at least. Ancient Greek is certainly an important waypoint in the development of medicine, as they coined many new ideas and methods of treatment. One of the most popular ideas about how sickness comes to be are the so-called four humors. Basically, the four humors are viewed as the four most important liquids in the human body that are always trying to balance each other out. At the same time, should one of these humors become out of balance, it would lead to illness, which then should be tried to be cured by rebalancing the humors. One of these humors, for example, was blood, which is certainly an important and easily accessible liquid to have in your body. The problem with it being easy to access is that, well, let's just say that if you were to see a doctor in ancient Greece, things like these might not be unusual to happen. Doctor, I'm not feeling too well, can you help me? Let's see. Yeah, I assume it must be one of the humors that is out of balance. Okay, what does it mean? Well, we'll have to get rid of it in order to rebalance it. Okay. So give me your arm, I might have to drain your blood. Wait, what? But don't worry, ancient Greece was rather tame. Wait till medieval Europe to see what they did to try and rebalance them. While this all still sounds a bit grim, it does show an important advancement in how people viewed health. Mainly that eventually illness wasn't entirely attributed to gods anymore. Instead of just blaming being sick on the gods, the Greeks actually tried to figure out what made us feel bad. They also came to the conclusion that a state of mind can impact the physical health of a person, which can absolutely be considered correct. The Greeks also started recording as much about illness as they could, and people like Hippocrates II even built a school where he and his students would try and figure out everything about medicine. Other doctors, like Asclepius, reach an insane level of fame and are even integrated in today's world. In the case of Asclepius, one thing which you may still see today is his staff with a snake around it, which is a universally used symbol related to medicine. After he became deified, the Greeks built temples to honor him and called them Asclepiae, which on top of functioning as temples also became the first hospitals in history. Everyone who felt sick could visit an Asclepion and would be treated with, for example, hot soothing teas or prescribed a bath in hot waters, which could also be found near those temples. Sometimes they would even be so generous and let a dog lick out the wound of an injured patient and wait, what? While the Greeks were quite well educated on everything medicine, doesn't mean they were flawless. In fact, the use of animals licking out wounds or giving all kinds of sometimes even poisonous herbs to people was rather common, although the Greeks believed it all to be assisting in the healing process. On the other hand though, there were people like this fella called Galen. Galen was an especially mad lad, as his curiosity overtook the one of most others. In his 50 years of living and practicing medicine in Rome, he became very eager about learning anatomy, which is why he regularly dissected various different animals to learn as much about their insides as possible. Impressively enough, many of his findings were commonly accepted for thousands of years, and this idea of a nervous system controlling all muscular functions from the brain is still viewed as correct today. It was thanks to him that surgery took a leap to the next level, and people could more confidently start operating on organs as well. Perhaps not always flawlessly, but certainly enough and better than ever before. Rome on the other hand, I have to say I love Rome, but they were idiots when it came to medicine. Or rather, less idiots and more ignorant, as they simply didn't see a need to ever properly study medicine themselves. As the Roman Republic, and later the Roman Empire, was one of the biggest conquerors of their time, whenever they needed medical knowledge about something, they'd simply get themselves doctors from the outside. This ignorance went so far that eventually, after the Roman campaign in Greece, the Romans had no doctors to go treat the wounded soldiers after their victory, so they simply enslaved the freshly conquered Greeks and made them heal their new Roman oppressors. Talk about asserting dominance. But in all seriousness, Roman medicine only experienced its first leap after they employed Greek doctors. They started building Asclepiae, you know, the temples of healing they also had in Greece, and also built first actual medical houses. Not exactly a hospital, but rather a privatized doctor's office. Simply a house where sick people could go and ask a doctor for help. That doesn't mean though that Rome had no doctors of themselves at all. They even built medical schools where people would go and study medicine, once again taught by the Greeks, and sometimes doctors in Rome were amongst the richest people in the empire. For example, We know about the private doctor of Emperor Augustus that his salary was around 300,000 sesterces per year, which is equal to around 150,000 US dollars. At the same time, a common foot soldier only made around 900 sesterces per year. Just because Rome followed pretty much everything the Greeks did when it came to medicine, doesn't mean they didn't have any ideas of their own. A lovely fella named Cato, for example, absolutely hated the Greeks and all they brought with them, including the medical knowledge. He even wrote about how to, in his opinion, properly treat a person using cabbage, as he thought that cabbage could treat just about anything. He believed that cabbage could be used to cure headaches, toothaches, liver pain, insomnia, nasal infections, and deafness, to name but a few. Yeah, I'm not making this shit up, he actually wrote that. He even dedicated 2 entire chapters of his book to cabbage and cabbage alone. Read for yourself if you don't believe me. By the way, this last sentence is him telling you to stuff cabbage into someone's ear to cure them from deafness. Function cure or not, the Romans had their own beliefs in what caused illnesses to begin with. In their opinion, people got sick primarily when they didn't live a righteous life. That doesn't mean they attributed all illness to that alone, as they also knew about things like malaria swarms and knew to actively avoid them when, for example, leading an army into battle. The reason they believed in that though was not because of germs or infections spreading through mosquitoes, but rather because of bad air, which is a theory that was then widely accepted for thousands of years. I should also say that Rome too had doctors specified in one field each, like a doctor for the eyes, doctor for the ears, or, interestingly enough, a doctor specified in snake bites. I get a bit shy if you got bitten by a snake and have to travel dozens of kilometers to get to the one doctor who can help you with that, but it is what it is. When I say medieval medicine, what's the first thing that comes to mind? I'd wager a decent amount of money that most of you think of him, a plague doctor. Now of course, not every doctor looked like this, since these distinguished gentlemen only appeared in the time of the bubonic plague, as the name already lets on. But they still show an interesting group of medical people, as these doctors were strong believers of the white clothing can protect me from the plague, which is honestly not wrong. Meanwhile, on the other hand, we have these doctors, and I think with these 2 images you can already figure out the 2 groups of physicians, studied and religious. Unlike in ancient Mesopotamia though, both groups were rather important in their own right. Religious doctors, mainly monks, were backed by the church and therefore had funds to do medical research in the name of God, primarily focusing on herbal and drug medicine. They studied a lot of basically whatever they were able to grow in their backyards and wrote down their findings in so-called herbals, which were more or less the Wikipedia of anything about plants. Later on, based on these findings, universities and medical schools were built, which taught everything related to known medicine. The upside of that all was that over decades of research and studying, eventually some genuinely decent doctors came about. On the downside though, the good doctors were primarily for the rich, as the pleb could just simply not afford them. They had to take help from hospitals, which in this time were more of a shelter provider than an actual health center, or they had to find wandering healers who... Either way, as I just said, herbs were still a very vital part of treatment for any kind of illness, but also beliefs like the 4 humors were still around, and with it the more terrifying methods of rebalancing those humors. Slicing open someone's arm or straight up injecting bleaches into a person's body were very common ways for trying to bring back the so-called balance. Also, giving people substances that would make them furiously vomit was not frowned upon, since the medically educated of the time thought it would help rebalance the humors. Doctors also didn't shy back from brutally pulling a rotten tooth out someone's mouth or straight up sawing off a leg as soon as it was deemed not savable. And they sometimes even recorded these undergoings as well as including their religious beliefs in those paintings. However, it should be said that all these methods of treatment were only used as a sort of last resort if the herbal approach didn't work out. Trained doctors were also seemingly very good at treating open wounds, setting broken bone state, and even amputating body parts and making sure the patient survives. In all of these instances though, the primary task was to make sure any wounds aren't being affected or causing too much blood loss, as either of those instances could end up in permanent departure from life. Therefore, burning out the wound with things like ripplingly hot oil was a very common thing to do. I know that sounds gruesome, but if the choice is between having someone pour hot oil in your wound or certain death, most people will choose the oil. Luckily though, anesthesia wasn't necessary at all in that procedure. Not that it existed anyways, but it wouldn't have made a difference, since you most certainly would just pass out from the immense pain anyways. As a last resort, all the illnesses that couldn't be cured by any form of medicine or surgery were to be removed by religious practices like exorcism, since the trend of blaming God or demons for being sick became more popular again in the Middle Ages. Within the Renaissance period, there's a sub-period in regards to medicine called the Medical Renaissance. I know, a crazy and almost unforeseeable name, even if it doesn't really make sense considering that Renaissance means rebirth, and there is practically nothing to rebirth in terms of medicine, but hey, I don't make the rules. Either way, does the name Medical Renaissance imply that the medicine had some special advancement, and guess what? It did! A lot of these advancements came from discoveries often focused around anatomy. People like Da Vinci, for example, meticulously studied the way muscles are constructed inside us and made sure to document all of his findings properly. Paré discovered new ways to stop bleeding and close wounds through some sort of herbal glue rather than burning them out with oil. That was especially helpful in war times where there were a lot of wounds. Although I'd like to imagine that with all new inventions, the change must have happened a bit like this. Alrighty, it seems like you got a nice big old wound that needs closing, eh? Yeah, I heard the French are using some kind of newfound paste to painlessly close them, right? Oh yeah, supposedly. But I don't believe in anything French. Timmy, hold him down. What? Close your eyes and imagine it's all a bad dream. Curing illnesses stayed pretty much the same, relying mainly on herbs or certain liquids, but thanks to these new anatomy-based findings, the medicine made a huge jump in terms of surgery. While Renaissance surgery still can't be really compared to today's surgery, it's important to note that the success rate after operations rose, as well as the post-surgery death rate massively dropped. It was also around this time that the first prosthetics were invented and used. But don't worry, England will show us how to take a step back in medicine in our next time period. I spent a while trying to figure out a way to start this period, but I couldn't, so I'll just tell you the facts quickly summarized. England at the time of the Industrial Revolution was big, dirty, loud, full of poverty, ruthless, drunk, ugly, and fucking dangerous. Similar to that was the medicine as well. Any major city at the time was so incredibly dirty that it'd be a miracle if a wound didn't get affected or in some cases lead straight to death. That in itself is not necessarily much different from any other time period, but if you pair it up with the factories causing injury after injury, it'd be no surprise that the average life expectancy actually went down to 36 years old, when it was indeed around 40 in the Middle Ages. The cramped cities, on top of that, made it very easy for various illnesses to spread, mainly tuberculosis, smallpox, or typhus. Desperate to find a cure to those diseases, people went for rather unusual medicine, often containing mercury or arsenic. For reasons that still refuse to explain themselves to me, this medicine got rather popular in industrial England, even though it didn't exactly cure any illness. It'd be more accurate to say that it overshadowed the illness with the insane poisoning it caused, which then again often cured people from the fatal disease called life, meaning they died. Obviously they died. However, as usual, the rich and powerful were living a better life. Some of those actually tried to improve medicine. I know, it's hard to believe that the rich actually do something that serves more people than just themselves. Either way, some ways those people interested in medicine tried to help were by carefully analyzing and categorizing exactly which herbs do what and in what dosage they are helpful. It was also around this time that a Scottish fellow named James Lind found out that the cause for scurvy was a lack of vitamins found in citrus fruit, today called vitamin C. Someone else that goes by the name of Edward Jenner actually found a way to prevent infection with certain diseases by making the human body immune to that disease. This process is what we call vaccination nowadays. By the way, if you are curious behind the insane story of how that all came to be, watch this video by Be Smart. But then again, in some other ways medicine still massively lagged behind and refused to change. Theories like bad air causing illnesses was widely accepted and viewed as common knowledge up until the end of the Industrial Revolution era. Bloodletting and leech injections were still common practice, although it in some cases got replaced by other treatment methods. This time is also where we made massive advancements in the drug sector of medicine, as opium became the first widely used painkiller drug, which then kinda led to a widespread opium addiction. But oh well, you win some, you lose some, I guess. And honestly, if I had to get surgery in industrial England, I might contemplate just dying, although sometimes they will come delivered with the surgery itself. Don't believe me? Let me give you an example then. A common surgery performed on some especially sick patients was called trepanation. Don't know what that is? Don't worry, I had to look it up as well. To sum it up, around this time, trepanation is the process of drilling a hole into someone's head, mind you, while they are awake, with the end goal of letting out evil spirits, hoping that they would magically cure the illness. In most cases, the patients just died. But regardless of that, the further development of pre-existing medical knowledge eventually led to some impressive improvements in the late to mid-19th century. Around this time was also where the germ theory became more popular. And eventually, all of these developments led to what we now call... I just assume you all know what medicine looks like nowadays, so I must skip this part. Hey Anya, it's time for your medicine. No!